website, I sent in my request for information by email. If it was true, I decided they would know. If it was false, they would also know and could squash it for good. Before long, I received the following short reply. Dear Barry, we have no information regarding the subject. Yours, the IAF site team. I got a reply from the entire site team? What was that? I wasn't sure if I should be touched by the teamwork or offended by the implied bureaucracy. There was no encouraging good luck in your search, no apologetic sorry couldn't help you, just a straight shooting, if we say any more, we'll have to kill you. They left me with nothing, but I had nothing to lose, so I wrote them again. Might you have any experts I can contact, I inquired, or recommend any institutions? Their second reply was shorter than the first. Dear Barry, we can assist you no further. Yours, the IAF site team. In other words, stop writing us already. We have a country to protect. I was no longer looking for a needle in the haystack. I was seeking proof the needle never existed. But how could I find evidence that seltzer bottles had never been dropped? I was beginning to understand why rumors are so insidious, so impossible to dispel. If I couldn't find the source of the rumor, I couldn't prove it never occurred. I'll talk off the paper for a moment and explain. A lot of people said, look at Exodus, it's an Exodus. I swear it was in the movie. I swear it was in the book. And the war is at the end, so I started at the end of the movie, and I watched every scene backwards. Nothing. I started with the book. I literally flipped through every page backwards. Nothing. Kept searching until I came across this movie. Cast a Giant Shadow. I hadn't heard about this movie. Many of you are from the generation that might have gone to see it when it was out. Does anyone remember this movie? This is a movie starring Kirk Douglas. About Mickey Marcus, thank you. This is a movie about Mickey Marcus, the American who went over during the war and helped organize what became the Israeli Army and the Air Force and helped them with his military experience. Kirk Douglas played him. It also had Frank Sinatra, Yul Brynner, and John Wayne. It had quite a cast. The man who made it is Melville Shavelson. He was born April 1st, 1917. He was one of Bob Hope's joke writers and wrote a lot of Bob Hope movies in the 50s. And he started in 38. He wrote a great book, if you wanted a really funny movie book, How to Write a Jewish Movie. It's all about the making of the movie and why he thought it was such a disaster and how much fun he had doing it. And he actually just died just a few months ago, August 8th. But luckily, I found out about him just in time. And using the internet, I tracked him down, called, must have been a very old agent, who gave him my number, and 20 minutes later, I got him on the phone. And he explained to me what happened in Cast a Giant Shadow. So rather than tell it to you, I'll let him tell you. And to do that, what I'm going to do is first show some video from the movie. And you have to forgive me. This is like filming my TV screen, okay? But you'll get a good sense of it. It's going to start with Kirk Douglas at the beginning of the battle. That has to do with seltzer. And then you'll see Frank Sinatra come in. And once Frank Sinatra gets in the plane, you'll stop hearing the soundtrack from the movie, and you'll hear Melville Shavelson from my interview with him talking about what happened. So what you hear is him saying that he had an advisor who was the official historian of the Air Force, who was there during the war, who said something like this happened. What you see is Frank Sinatra in the beginning throwing out the bottle, and then you see him later on spraying a bottle. Well, on the phone he said he just added it in for a joke, the spraying, but he insists about the throwing. And I'll go back to reading from the chapter talking about this. And what I'll do is I'm going to jump ahead in the chapter talking about a scene later in the movie. Sinatra squirting a seltzer bottle at an enemy jet fighter. It was also absurd. But while Sinatra could not be saved by his seltzer bombs, we soon learned that at a deeper, more spiritual level, Kirk Douglas's character. Douglas's character, David Mickey Marcus, never understood why the Israelis gave such importance to Jerusalem. Why waste so many lives for something of such little strategic value? He starts arguing with the Yul Brynner character, who is doubtful they can ever break through. And Douglas counters his defeatist attitude with, "We made it through the Red Sea, didn't we?" Yul Brynner, taken back, points out that for the first time in the movie at least, Douglas has said we. He's identifying with the Jews, his own people. Douglas thinks a moment before an impassioned look comes over his face. "You people, a pipsqueak nation, tin can army that fights with seltzer bottles. We! All my life I've been looking for where I belong. Turns out it's here, that Catskill Mountains with Arabs." Seltzer's been transformed from a humorous incident earlier in the film into a symbol of something greater. It represents the lack of resources Israel had against the invading armies. More importantly, it represents how Israel ingeniously and with great bravery employed these limited resources. When Douglas calls Israel a tin can army that fights with seltzer bottles, his character is claiming fellowship with the essential Jewish character of his people, summoned up in the image of a seltzer bottle tossed from a plane. Douglass finishes his speech by claiming their Jerusalem mission as his own. I've been so angry with the world ever since I was circumcised without my permission. All of a sudden, I find out I'm not so special after all. Everyone around me here is in the same boat, and no one's belly aching. Okay, stand up and be counted, the man said. I'm not fighting anymore because I'm ashamed of being a Jew. I'm fighting because I'm stiff-necked and proud of it. Next week, he cries to Yul Brynner. Next week in Jerusalem. After all my research, with its mix of intriguing leads and frustrating dead ends, my talk with Shavelson brought my research to a close. I had resisted as long as reason had allowed, but I can hold out no longer. I became a believer at last. Did Israel depend on Seltzer to win the War of Independence? Absolutely not. Did Seltzer help to win the war? Not very likely. Did Seltzer play a military role in the creation of the Jewish state? Well, against odds and common sense, it would seem it actually did, at least once. That left me with only one last thing to do. Tell my mother-in-law that she'd been right all along. After explaining to her what I learned about my research and my final conversation with Shavelson, I told her I was sorry I'd ever doubted her. That's okay, she said. Listen, I doubt myself very often. And she laughed. Would you look at that? Self-effacing so I wouldn't feel bad. Didn't I tell you? How could you not love a mother-in-law like that?